I got into filmmaking through activism, actually. So I was in college and I was involved in Central American politics. So I was learning about U.S. intervention in Latin America, and I was really upset. I was living in the States already at the time, even though I was from Canada originally. And I just was amazed at the information that was coming up from El Salvador and Nicaragua through these alternative films, mostly 16 millimeter films that were being shown on campuses. And I think I just had this feeling that if people could have access to this alternative information about things, that they would act and do something about the horrible impact that our government policies were having on that region. So, it was pre-internet. It wasn't that easy to get alternative information at the time. There was press, but there wasn't. There was alternative media, but it was more organized around community screenings, and there was a real struggle over access to distribution channels. So I, at first, thought I would be a journalist, and then the more I got into documentary and really understanding how powerful moving images could be, and how they could really change audiences' perspectives and give people alternative information, it just was something that I wanted to do. So I moved to New York City after college, and I joined a collective called Paper Tiger Television, which was doing work for public access cable, which was channels that, well, this is a longer story, but anyway, there was a struggle to get access, for people to have access to channels on cable television. Again, because it was pre-internet, and so you could make work, but the idea was to get it out to people. So I started working collectively in that group, and started making films. So My Brooklyn is a film that I made with Allison Dean, who's an urban planner and journalist, and it's about the redevelopment of an area in Brooklyn called the Fulton Mall, which was a thriving, successful African-American and Caribbean shopping district right in the heart of Brooklyn. It was actually the third most profitable shopping district in the entire city of New York. Nevertheless, the city always considered it kind of a failure and wanted to redevelop it, and so they did a rezoning, which basically resulted in the transformation of this area through the displacement of a lot of small businesses, catering to a more working class, mostly people of color and immigrant communities, and now it's got a lot of luxury housing and big box chain stores and looks a lot like every other shopping district in the United States. And so the film looks at that, but through the lens of my personal experience as somebody who came to New York in the 80s, moved to Brooklyn because the rents were cheap, and because there was a vibrant activist and artistic culture flourishing there, and just sort of trying to interrogate my role in all of these changes, sort of being part of the cause of gentrification and also being impacted by it. So it tries to reframe gentrification away from blaming individual people for moving to an area, and tries to focus the conversation more on policies and looking at how the ways that cities change isn't natural or inevitable, but driven by concrete policies. In this case, a collusion between real estate developers and banks and city government, and the ways that the public is left out of that process or deliberately not allowed to engage in the process. I think that the work that I do, I'm incredibly privileged to be able to do. I mean, documentary filmmaking allows me to go out in the world and document people who are doing amazing work and ask questions about things that I want to know about, and it's an amazing kind of work to do, and sometimes I really feel that it has impact. So one of the things about My Brooklyn has been, it didn't necessarily motivate people to go out and stop the change at Fulton Mall in Brooklyn, because it's late for that. I mean, the changes have already happened. But people do tell me that after they see the film, they carry it with them in some part of their brain, and that when they're confronted with a situation in their neighborhood or they see a new development project, they're more likely to engage with it in a more systemic and political way than maybe they would have before. So to ask questions like, well, who's building this, and what is the zoning here, and what kind of approvals are necessary to build this? And I think it's helped people understand how to put pressure in the right places to leverage political activism in the right way, so that hopefully we can have more accountable and just development in the city. So for me, there's so many ways that documentaries intersect with social change, and I think being part of that is just really exciting, and I feel privileged to do it. And I would also say that my work isn't just filmmaking, it's also being a professor and working with students at Hunter College in New York City, and that is equally important to me in terms of what I do. To sort of this engagement with students about helping them to figure out how to tell their stories and engage in an analytical and critical way with the world through documentary filmmaking is it's enriching. Well, I never set out to be a filmmaker and then decided between documentary and fiction. I actually have made a fiction film. It dealt with a telemarketing prison inmate and a waitress in an airport coffee shop, and a relationship that evolved over the phone between them. And that was great fun. I mean, I think that drama can be a way of engaging people in social and political issues also. It's just very hard to raise the money all at one time to make a dramatic film. So, but I guess for me, I've never considered working in anything but documentary. I just think the real world is really interesting and engaging, and I don't feel the need to write stories. I'd rather find them. I would also say that documentary is changing, and I think more people are realizing that documentary isn't just journalism. It's actually an art form that can involve reenactment and creative treatment of reality in many ways, and people are accepting more that documentaries come from a point of view and a subjective place, and that there are lots of strategies that documentary filmmakers use that aren't strictly the type of strategies we think of documentary as using, narration and visuals that illustrate what's being said in that narration. I mean, there's just tons of films out there now that are really, and have always, I think, there've always been films that took a more lyrical, creative, impressionistic, reflexive approach to reality. So I think that we can't put documentary in a narrow box. I think it's more that there's a continuum, and documentary stretches across a lot of it. It's trying to talk about the real world. So that's about as limiting as I would make it. The intersection of arts and politics. Of course they're interconnected. I don't know how one could not. I mean, look at the Soviet Union, in when they had their revolution in the early 20th century. It was 1917, I think. The first thing they did was create film trains where people, these trains that would go across the country and show films to a huge nation of people that had never seen film before. And it was a way that the nation represented itself to itself, and so I think that there's just always been a deep connection between film arts and other arts and politics, whether it's on the level of the nation or the level of individual groups or people trying to express themselves. I mean, even, I came up in the 90s, it was all about identity politics and people sort of celebrating suppressed histories and identities that weren't recognized by the mainstream, and film was so much part of that. I mean, when I say film, I mean video and film and all of the moving image arts. So I've never separated them. I guess there are film people who have no politics and political people who aren't interested in the arts, but I think that for me they're deeply integrated. I mean, last night when I was at the screening of My Brooklyn at Cinema Politica, it was so clear to me that people were there to experience a film, and they were there to learn something, but they were also there to experience a cultural moment together, and that there's a deep value to cultural moments. I mean, culture is a way that we be close to one another and talk to one another. And so I don't see them as separate at all. I'm still working on getting my Brooklyn out into the world. I've been screening it a lot still. We're working on study guide so that people can use it in the classroom with structured activities and related supporting materials and stuff. So I have not embarked on another film project yet. I'm actually working on a book about documentary filmmaking with a colleague of mine at Hunter College that will be about how to make films, but situating all of that technical information, like what camera you're using, what lens should you use, what microphone, and all that in a context of what it all means politically, ethically, how technical choices create meaning. So we're working on that, and that's got me pretty busy for the next year. I don't know what the situation is in Canada because I'm working in the U.S. context. I would say the problem for me is that while there's more and more ways that people can see films, there's a lot more expectation that content will be free or very inexpensive. And for us, it's becoming really hard to monetize what we do. So in other words, I do a lot of distribution in the educational market to universities in Canada as well as in the U.S. And one of the things that's happening there is increasingly universities having their budgets cut and it being harder and harder to get an educational rate for a film. So, it's the never-ending struggle. And I think we have less government support than you do for filmmaking in general. So, it's an ongoing difficulty trying to make films. So distribution-wise, I think we need more channels on broadcast for one. I think we have 2 documentary series that show independent documentaries on public television, which is not a lot. There's others, but there's 2 national ones. So I would say we need more outlets. We need more funding. We need more support. We need, I think we need to figure out how individual filmmakers can access platforms like Netflix and iTunes, because you need to go through a distributor or an aggregator for that, and I think that that's a problem. We need some video on demand platforms that individual filmmakers can access, because it's very hard to navigate that by yourself. From what I understand, it's impossible. Unless you have a distributor that packages your work and puts it there. So I think that's something that we need. I think the work that Cinema Politica is doing is amazing. I am astonished at the audiences that come out for these films and that they come out every week. The programming is excellent. The networking with sponsoring organizations, like my film last night, our film was sponsored by the Planners Network, which is a group of progressive urban planners. The fact that they brought a housing organizer in to connect the issues in my Brooklyn to the gentrification issues that are happening here. I think the work is amazing. I think it's clear that there's a hunger for this kind of work shown in this way. The fact that there's all these different chapters in different places is amazing, and I would expect that to continue to grow. And I think it speaks to the fact that a lot of festivals have lost some of the political edge that maybe they once had. Not all, and I don't want to criticize film festivals blanketly, but I do think that there's a way that documentary, when I first started making films, was always identified with more progressive and radical politics because it didn't have a lot of mainstream appeal at the time, and most people who were making documentaries were leftists or were involved in political issues. And I think that I think that history is not clear to a lot of younger people who come to documentary filmmaking, and they don't really have that context of what the field grew out of. And I think that, to me, documentary is always associated with politics. The whole roots of documentary come out of political movements. So I guess Cinema Politica, for me, is returning documentary to those roots in a way that's really resonating with people now. And that's great, because, you can't harangue young people and be like, you need to care about the politics and the history. But obviously, Cinema Politica is bringing really political films, and people are going to see them because they want to and because they're being nourished by that. So I think it's fabulous, and it's a great model. And I hope it just keeps going. And there's hundreds of Cinema Politicas all over the world. So that's what I think.